At 32 years old, I had learned that some scars never truly heal. They fester quietly, resurfacing during the most momentous occasions. In my case, my sister's wedding was that moment. As I prepared for a celebration that was meant to honor love and unity, I found myself confronting an unexpected truth. Sometimes, the ties that bind can also tear you apart. My name is Ashley, and though many see me as a doting sister and devoted wife, my heart has long carried the weight of exclusion, a burden compounded by years of feeling sidelined by those who were supposed to love me unconditionally. This is the story of how my sister's decision to impose her own rules on our family's time, and by extension, on my own life, set off a chain of events that forced me to fight for the right to be seen as a partner, not a placeholder. The invitation arrived on a crisp October morning. Enclosed in elegant stationery with ornate calligraphy was an announcement that my sister Miranda was finally taking the plunge into married life. I couldn't help but feel a surge of conflicting emotions as I read her heartfelt words about love, commitment, and the promise of a bright future. Miranda had always been the golden child of our family, a beacon of perfection whose every move was scrutinized, admired, and at times envied. Our family, a sprawling mosaic of personalities and past grievances, was set to gather in a rented house not far from the wedding venue, a charming estate nestled 2 hours from our hometown. The weekend was to be filled with laughter, shared memories, and, as Miranda insisted, a strict adherence to tradition. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to the subtle ways our family dynamics revealed themselves during such reunions, but I never anticipated at this time the tension would boil over. Miranda's instructions were unequivocal. While the ceremony and reception were to be intimate affairs with only the closest friends and family in attendance, roughly 50 guests in total, she made it abundantly clear that the reception would be strictly child-free. At first glance, the policy seemed harmless enough, a desire for an adult atmosphere, a respite from the chaos that children sometimes bring. However, the devil was in the details. As I read further, a chill ran down my spine. Miranda had decided that our daughter, little Emma, 23 months of age, would be taken care of not by a professional babysitter, but by my husband, Dan. Yes, the very same Dan who, despite all his kindness and support, had always stood in the periphery of our family's decisions. In her words, it was non-negotiable. Dan would remain behind with Emma, while I attended the reception alone. I couldn't understand how something so simple, choosing a caregiver, could spark such a deep sense of injustice. The idea that my husband, who had weathered his own storms and stood by me through every trial, would be relegated to a mere chaperone while I was left to navigate the festivities on my own, filled me with a mixture of anger and profound sadness. Our family had always been a delicate balance of affection and animosity, where unspoken grudges and buried resentments simmered just beneath the surface. Growing up as a middle child, I often felt caught between the extremes, the overachieving, picture-perfect Miranda, and our free-spirited younger sister who never quite fit the mold. For years, I'd harbored a quiet resentment toward the favoritism that seemed to shower upon Miranda, a feeling only amplified by the way our parents and extended relatives treated me. Dan, my husband, was the one constant in my life, a partner whose unwavering support had been both a blessing and, in moments like this, a bitter pill to swallow. I recalled the countless times he had offered words of comfort, assuring me that my worth was never determined by the arbitrary rules set by family tradition. Yet, as the wedding day approached, his hurt was palpable. He was not just upset about being forced in the role of an impromptu babysitter. He felt humiliated, sidelined, and most of all, excluded. The night before the wedding, the air in our shared home was thick with tension. Dan and I sat in our cozy living room, the soft glow of a table lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Emma was already asleep in her crib, her gentle breathing a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling around us. "I just don't understand it," Dan murmured, his brow furrowed with frustration as he sipped on his tea. "We're supposed to be a team. Yet, they're making it seem like I'm not even a part of the celebration. It's as if I don't deserve to be there with you." I reached out, taking his hand in mine, feeling the rough calluses that had supported me through so many hard times. "I know, love. It hurts. It really does. But sometimes these things aren't personal. Miranda has always been controlling in her own way. She's obsessed with making everything exactly as she envisions it. Dan's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he shook his head slowly. But why Emma? Why should our little girl be the bargaining chip in all of this? I don't want to be forced into a role that makes me feel less than a partner. I want to be there with you, sharing this moment, not as a caretaker, but as someone who belongs. The weight of his words sank in. In that quiet moment, I realized that this wedding was not just about celebrating Miranda's union. It was about confronting the deep-seated inequities that had defined our family for far too long. The following morning, I awoke to the gentle chirping of birds outside our window, a serene reminder that life continued unabated despite the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. I had spent the night tossing and turning, replaying the conversation with Dan in my mind. Each word, each tear, had etched itself into my memory, fueling a determination that I hadn't felt in years. I decided to take a proactive step. Over a cup of steaming coffee, I drafted a careful message to my mom, expressing my desire to secure a babysitter for the duration of the reception. I explained that it wasn't merely about convenience. It was about ensuring that Dan and I could experience the wedding as partners, side by side. I believed that if we had the option to choose a caregiver, then the event wouldn't feel like a forced separation. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed with a reply from Mom. Her words were curt and laced with defensiveness. I already discussed this with Miranda. She's made it clear, no babysitter. Dan is the one who'll watch Emma, and that's that. The finality of her tone left no room for negotiation. I felt a flush of anger rising in my chest, not just for the dismissal of my concerns, but for the way my feelings were being minimized. Was it so hard for them to understand that this wasn't just about a babysitting arrangement? It was about my dignity, our family's unity, and the respect we all deserved. As the day unfolded, I began to notice the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in behavior among my family members. Cousins who had always been friendly now cast sideways glances as I passed by. My mom's gentle smiles were replaced by strained expressions that hinted at deeper disagreements. Even Miranda, radiant in her bridal preparations, seemed to view my concerns as an inconvenience, a disruption to her carefully orchestrated day. At the bridal suite, while I assisted with final touches and helped Miranda adjust her delicate veil, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was terribly off. Miranda's eyes, usually so warm and inviting, flashed with a mixture of annoyance and superiority whenever I broached the subject of the babysitting dilemma. "Ashley," she said softly, her tone clipped as she adjusted the delicate lace of her gown. "This is my day, not yours. I've made my decision, and I expect everyone to respect it." Her words, though delivered in a tone that was meant to be reassuring, struck me like a cold slap. In that instant, I realized that this was more than a logistical disagreement. It was emblematic of a deeper, festering rivalry that dated back to our childhood. By early evening, the tension in the air was nearly tangible as we gathered for the rehearsal dinner. The room was adorned with soft candlelight and the gentle hum of polite conversation, but beneath the surface, old resentments and unspoken accusations simmered. I found myself seated at a table with family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Each interaction a reminder of the delicate balance that held our fractured family together. During dinner, I couldn't help but notice the furtive glances exchanged between my mom and Miranda. They spoke silently of secrets and compromises, of decisions made without my input. The conversation eventually turned to the wedding reception, and I seized an opportunity to voice my feelings. "Don't you think," I began hesitantly, "that maybe we should consider a babysitter for Emma during the reception? I mean, it would be nice to have Dan with us for the entire evening, instead of feeling forced apart." A ripple of murmurs spread across the table. My aunt, always a mediator, tried to smooth things over. "Ashley, we understand your point, but Miranda has always been very clear about her wishes. Besides, it's not that she wants to exclude Dan. It's just that she feels most comfortable when the family is together in a certain way." But to me, the implication was clear. My concerns were trivial compared to Miranda's vision. I could see the hurt in Dan's eyes across the table, a silent plea for understanding that went unheeded. The conversation soon shifted to lighter topics, but the tension lingered. a dark cloud hovering over every laugh and clink of glass. Later that night, as I retreated to my room, the events of the day replayed over and over in my mind. I lay awake, the soft rustling of the wind outside my window, the only sound in the darkness. My thoughts churned with memories of past family gatherings, times when I felt like an afterthought, always the one forced to conform to expectations that didn't align with who I was. I thought of the times when Dan had comforted me after particularly harsh words from our relatives, his arms a safe haven from a world that refused to see us as equals. I remembered the quiet promises we'd made to each other, to never let anyone diminish our worth, to always fight for the right to be seen as a team. And now, on the eve of Miranda's wedding, those promises echoed in my heart, urging me to stand up for what was right. In the stillness of the night, I resolved that come the morning, I would confront Miranda one last time. I would make it clear that while I respected her right to organize her wedding as she saw fit, I would no longer tolerate being forced into a corner where my family's needs were dismissed as an inconvenience. I wasn't about to let this day slip by as just another example of our family's cruel favoritism and unyielding tradition. The next morning arrived with a deceptive calm. Outside, the sky was a brilliant blue, the crisp air filled with the promise of a new beginning. But inside, the storm was gathering force. I woke early, my heart pounding with a mix of determination and apprehension. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. I found Dan in the kitchen, quietly preparing a light breakfast. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a reflection of the same resolve I felt stirring within me. "We're doing this together," he said softly, his voice steady despite the tumult of emotions. "No one should make us feel excluded, not on our own daughter's sake, and certainly not on a day that's supposed to be about celebration." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I'm going to speak with Miranda. I'm tired of being treated like a secondary afterthought. Today, I need her to understand that our family isn't something to be rearranged like a set piece at her wedding. It's about respect, about inclusion." Later that morning, amidst the final flurry of wedding preparations, I sought out Miranda in a quiet corner of the bustling bridal suite. The room was alive with activity, hairstylists and makeup artists flitting about, the air thick with anticipation and perfume. But in that cacophony, I found a moment of stillness as I pulled Miranda aside. "Miranda, we need to talk," I said firmly, my voice trembling ever so slightly with the force of my conviction. Her eyes, momentarily surprised, quickly hardened into a mask of cool detachment. "What is it, Ashley?" "I'm in the middle of things here." Taking a deep breath, I met her gaze head on. "It's about the reception. I understand you want a child-free environment, and I get that, but I can't accept that Dan is the only option for watching Emma. I love our daughter, and I love Dan. I want us to enjoy the reception together. As a family, it hurts to be made to feel like we're an afterthought, like we're not allowed to choose who cares for our child." For a long moment, the silence between us was deafening. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the tension between duty and desire, between tradition and the unspoken need for change. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and measured. "Ashley, you know this isn't personal. I've thought about it long and hard, and this is what makes me feel secure on my wedding day. I need to know that everything is exactly as I envision it. I'm sorry if that makes you feel excluded, but it's my decision." The words, meant to be comforting, rang hollow in my ears. In that instant, I realized that this wasn't merely about a babysitting arrangement. It was about control, about the insidious ways in which our family's dynamics had always prioritized one person's needs over another's. The wedding reception was set in a grand, elegantly decorated hall, nestled on the grounds of the estate. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, their light dancing off polished table surfaces laden with fine china and flickering candles. Outside, winter's chill gave way to a gentle, wintry glow as guests arrived in an array of formal attire, their laughter and whispered greetings filling the crisp air. Yet behind the surface of festivity, an undercurrent of tension pulsed, one that had been building for weeks and was about to erupt. As I stepped into the reception hall, my heart pounded in my chest with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. I had resolved that day to stand up for Dan and for myself. We had made our decision. Either our daughter Emma would be cared for by a professional babysitter so Dan could join me, or I would not attend the reception at all. And despite the consequences I knew might follow, I was determined that no one would force us into a situation where we felt sidelined. I could see Miranda's radiant smile as she greeted guests with a practiced grace. Her eyes, however, betrayed a fleeting glimpse of something colder when she caught my eye. I wondered if she had sensed the confrontation from the previous morning, if her carefully constructed world was already beginning to crack under the strain of unresolved grievances. I clutched my phone, its screen still displaying the terse message from Mom reaffirming the no babysitter rule, a constant reminder of the battle I had already begun to fight. Throughout the evening, the atmosphere in the hall was layered with contradictions. Groups of family members and friends laughed over shared memories while, in quieter corners, whispered conversations hinted at undercurrents of dissent. I sat at a long table with a few supportive relatives, those who, despite the storm of opinions, had always believed that every family member deserved respect. Yet even among them, I could sense hesitation and fear of stirring up more conflict. Dan, after some initial reluctance, had eventually decided to leave Emma in the care of a neighbor, a trusted friend of our family who had volunteered at the last minute, offering to fill in as a temporary guardian. The decision had not been without its own emotional cost, for it felt as though the gesture of professional help was a tacit admission that my husband was no longer welcome as celebration that was supposed to bring our family together. When I glanced at him during the reception, his eyes told the story of a man who felt both liberated and isolated. Liberated from the constraints of forced separation, yet isolated by a family tradition that had long ago ceased to nurture true inclusion. Midway through the reception, the moment arrived for the official toast, a cherished tradition intended to honor the newlyweds and the journey that had led them to this day. Miranda's mother began the proceedings with a warm speech, recalling fond memories of Miranda's childhood and the excitement of seeing her step into a new chapter of life. Yet, as the evening wore on, the toast became a subtle battleground for unspoken resentments. When it was finally Miranda's turn to speak, her tone shifted. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she began, her voice unwavering yet edged with an intensity that made several guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. "This day is not only about the union of two people, but about the unity of our families, a unity that has been tested and proven over time." Her eyes swept the room, pausing momentarily on me. In that charged silence, I felt the weight of every whispered slight, every moment of exclusion that had led up to this day. Her words, carefully chosen, carried an implication I could no longer ignore, that family unity was predicated on adherence to certain unyielding traditions, even if those traditions meant sidelining those who dared to question them. It was a public declaration, a reminder that the rules were set and any deviation would be met with disapproval. The toast ended with polite applause, but the silence that followed was heavy, as if each person in the room was struggling with their own conflicted emotions. As the reception continued, I found myself drifting between moments of joy and profound sorrow. Laughter from other tables and the clinking of glasses were constant reminders of the celebration's outward cheer. Yet beneath it all, my mind was preoccupied with the fallout of that tense morning confrontation. I tried to engage with relatives who had always been supportive, but even their words were tinged with an unspoken warning, a caution not to escalate matters further. In a quiet corridor off the main hall, I encountered my cousin Lila, whose gentle eyes and empathetic smile had often been a source of comfort during turbulent family events. "Ashley," she whispered as we leaned against a cool marble wall, "I know this isn't easy. I just want you to know that you're not alone. We all deserve to be treated with respect, especially on a day like today." Her words, though kind, were accompanied by a worried glance toward the hall, as if she feared the next unexpected eruption of anger. I nodded silently, grateful for her reassurance. But even as I attempted to muster a sense of calm, my phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from friends and family members who had caught wind of the earlier dispute. Some messages were sympathetic, others curtly admonishing me for causing a scene. The cacophony of voices left me feeling both validated and isolated, a paradox that had defined so much of my existence in our fractured family. Unable to bear the tumult, I slipped away from the reception hall into a quieter part of the estate. Outside, The crisp night air enveloped me in a refreshing embrace, the stars glistening like distant beacons of hope. I wandered along a winding path lined with ancient trees, their bare branches reaching skyward as if in silent supplication. In the solitude, I allowed myself to reflect on the events of the day, each step carrying the heavy burden of years of unacknowledged pain. I remembered the countless times I had suppressed my own needs for the sake of maintaining peace, a peace that was often an illusion, a fragile veneer hiding deeper wounds. Tonight, as the cold air mingled with the warmth of my determination, I resolved that I would no longer allow myself to be diminished by the outdated traditions of our family. I was more than a pawn in a game of control and exclusion. I had the right to define my own worth, to choose a future where respect and inclusion were not negotiable. The next morning, the fallout from the previous night's events was impossible to ignore. The estate was abuzz with hushed conversations and side glances, an unspoken consensus that something fundamental had shifted. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the large windows of the bridal suite, I gathered my resolve to confront the lingering tension head-on. I arranged to meet with several family members who had expressed concern over the previous day's confrontations. In a quiet sitting room away from the prying eyes of the main hall, I found myself facing a group of relatives, cousins, aunts, and even my mom, each one wrestling with conflicting emotions. "Ashley," my aunt began cautiously, "we understand your feelings, but you must also see that Miranda has her own vision for her wedding day. It's important that we all respect her wishes." Her tone was conciliatory, but beneath it lay a firmness that left little room for counterargument. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I respect Miranda's vision," I said slowly, "but this isn't about control or preference. It's about the way we treat each other as a family. I'm not asking for an unreasonable favor. I'm simply asking that my husband, Dan, not be made to feel excluded on a day that is meant to celebrate love and unity. We deserve to be together as a family, even if that means making slight adjustments to a tradition that no longer serves us." The room fell silent for a long moment. My mom's eyes, usually so gentle, narrowed in a mix of concern and disapproval. "Ashley, I understand that you feel hurt, but you have to realize that these decisions were made long ago. Sometimes we must accept things as they are, even if it isn't perfect for everyone." Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they felt dismissive of the very real pain that I had endured for so many years. "I can't accept that," I replied quietly but firmly. "I refuse to be treated as if my feelings are an inconvenience. If being together as a family means that we must let go of outdated rules and prejudices, then I'm willing to fight for that change." Over the course of the day, as word of the confrontation spread to the family, it became clear that loyalties were deeply divided. Some relatives rallied around my perspective, empathizing with my desire to be treated as an equal member of the family. Others clung to the old traditions, insisting that Miranda's wishes were sacrosanct and that any deviation would undermine the sanctity of the occasion. I received messages from long-lost cousins and distant relatives who voiced their support, each one echoing the sentiment that families must evolve if they were ever to heal old wounds. At the same time, I was bombarded with curt messages from those who believed that my actions were nothing more than rebellious stubbornness, a challenge to the natural order of our family. The conflicting feedback left me feeling as if I were caught in the middle of a tug-of-war, with every word exchange a reminder of the deep-seated divisions that had long festered beneath the surface. Throughout the day, I revisited old memories, the moments when I had felt silenced, when my needs had been dismissed without question. I recalled the many family gatherings where my voice had been drowned out by the louder, more dominant personalities. I thought about the sacrifices I had made in the name of unity, and the endless compromises that had only left me feeling more isolated. In the quiet moments, as the estate slowly returned to a semblance of order, I vowed to never allow my worth to be diminished again by the ghost of a past that refused to change. That evening, after the family had dispersed and the estate was once again cloaked in silence, I found myself alone with my thoughts. Dan and I returned to our temporary lodging, a modest room set aside for guests who felt overwhelmed by the events of the day. The space was small, yet offered a sanctuary from the chaos that had consumed the wedding festivities. Dan sat by the window, looking out over the snow-covered grounds, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a distant street lamp. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. I never wanted this day to be about fighting or exclusion. I joined him by the window, taking his hand in mine as I tried to offer comfort without words. "It's not your fault," I murmured. I never imagined that standing up for us would cause so much pain. But I couldn't let them treat us like we're second-class citizens in our own family. We deserve better. I deserve better. He sighed, his gaze distant. Sometimes I wonder if this family will ever understand that our love and our bond should be celebrated, not compartmentalized. I want to be there with you, sharing every moment, big or small, but it feels like we're always on the outside looking in. The quiet confession hung between us, a bittersweet reminder of the struggle to reconcile the past with our hopes for the future. In that shared silence, I began to see a way forward, a path that required courage, not just in the face of tradition, but in the embrace of change. I resolved that, no matter how tangled the web of expectations might be, I would continue to fight for a family that valued each member equally, a family where love wasn't conditional on conformity. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in reflection, journaling late into the night, pouring my heart onto pages that served as both a record pain and a roadmap for healing. I revisited memories of laughter and tears, tracing the origins of my own sense of self-worth to moments both bright and dark. Every recollection was a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of a past that had shaped me but did not have to define my future. I began to see that the fight wasn't simply about a babysitting arrangement or a single wedding day. It was about reclaiming my identity from the confines of a legacy that had long treated me as an afterthought. I had been molded by the choices of others for so long that I had almost forgotten what it meant to choose for myself. In that clarity, I found a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to build a future where my voice, and the voices of those I loved, would not be silenced by outdated traditions or familial grudges. The wedding day had passed, but its echoes continued to reverberate through our family's gatherings and conversations. Over the next few weeks, I found myself at a crossroads, torn between the desire to mend the fractures of our past and the need to chart a new course for the future. Every conversation with family members became a delicate dance of compromise and confrontation, a constant reminder that healing required both forgiveness and change. One crisp Saturday afternoon, as I sat in the family's living room surrounded by a few close relatives, I decided it was time to articulate my vision for what our family could become. "I know that change is difficult," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath it. "But we can't keep living in a past that no longer serves us. We have a chance to build a family that is truly united, a family where every member's needs are valued, where no one is forced to choose between tradition and their own dignity." There was a long pause, as if the very air in the room was weighing my words. Finally, one of my cousins, Maria, spoke up. "Ashley, I've felt this way for a long time," she admitted softly. "We've all been living in the shadows of old expectations. It's time we let go of what hurts us and embrace a future where we're all seen and heard." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated with everyone present. In that moment, I sensed a shift, a small, tentative step toward the kind of reconciliation that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Though not everyone agreed fully, a few of our family members expressed a willingness to explore new ways of relating to each other, a hope that, even if fragile, could be nurtured into lasting change. In the ensuing days, I began to engage in heartfelt conversations with those who had previously dismissed my concerns. I listened to their fears and hesitations, sharing my own vulnerabilities in return. It wasn't an easy process. Old wounds are slow to heal, and the scars of exclusion and neglect do not vanish overnight. But there was progress. Slowly, some relatives began to understand that a family is not defined solely by rigid traditions or unyielding expectations, but by the ability to adapt, to learn from the past, and to embrace each other with genuine compassion. I also reached out to Miranda in a bid to mend the frayed threads of our sisterly bond. One rainy afternoon, when the world outside was awash in muted grays, we sat down together in a quiet cafe. Over steaming cups of coffee, we talked, not as adversaries, but as two sisters with shared history and a hope for the future. Miranda admitted that her insistence on every detail of the wedding had been driven by her own insecurities and the overwhelming pressure to create a perfect day. I, in turn, shared the pain I had felt all those years, a pain that had been magnified by every instant exclusion. Though the conversation was far from a complete reconciliation, it marked a turning point. We both recognized that our love for each other was stronger than the differences that had once seemed insurmountable. As the wedding memories slowly began to fade into the background, our family embarked on a tentative journey toward healing. Small gatherings replaced the grand, tense events of the past, and these new moments were characterized by a willingness to listen, to compromise, and most importantly, to recognize the unique needs of each individual. I began to see that while the old traditions had their place, there was room for evolution, an evolution that could lead to a more inclusive, loving family dynamic. Dan and I, too, found solace in our renewed sense of partnership. We began to plan future events on our own terms, where our choices were respected and our voices were heard. Every small victory, a family dinner where Dan's presence was acknowledged as essential, a casual get-together where our decisions were met with support, served as a building block for the future we envisioned.